The funny thing about people who worship silence is that they always expect it to protect them, until it turns against them. The music died in the middle of the chorus. 1 second, the backyard behind Brenda Holloway's enormous white colonial house pulsed with laughter, clinking champagne glasses, and a live country band belting out an old Garth Brooks hit. The next, everything stopped so abruptly that even the birds seemed confused. The lead singer lowered his guitar. The drummer froze with his sticks still hanging in the air. Conversations dissolved into an awkward hush that felt heavier than any song ever could. I could smell charcoal drifting from the expensive barbecue pits lined across her patio. Fresh-cut grass mixed with sweet perfume and grilled steak. The kind of backyard luxury HOA newsletters loved photographing for their monthly magazine. White tints fluttered gently in the July breeze. Gold balloons marked the entrance. Nearly 100 guests stood scattered across the perfectly manicured lawn, staring toward the driveway, where 2 county code enforcement officers had just stepped through the open gate. Brenda's smile disappeared so fast, it almost looked painful. "There has to be some mistake," she said, still clutching a champagne flute decorated with tiny gold ribbons. "This is a private celebration." One of the officers calmly unfolded a clipboard. "We received documentation regarding a violation of the neighborhood's daytime amplified sound policy." I watched from across the street. My cordless drill rested silently on the tailgate of my pickup. The stack of cedar fence boards beside me remained untouched. I hadn't turned on a single speaker all morning. I simply leaned against the truck, coffee still warm in my hand, while a strange mixture of barbecue smoke and fresh sawdust floated through the summer air. Brenda spotted me almost immediately. Her eyes locked onto mine across the road. The expression on her face shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to anger. "You!" she shouted loud enough for every guest to hear. "You did this." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The officer continued reading. According to Article 8, Section 3.2, all outdoor amplified music exceeding neighborhood ambient levels between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. is prohibited without written HOA approval. Several guests exchanged puzzled looks. One woman slowly lowered her wine glass. A man wearing a golf polo quietly asked, "Wait, wasn't this Brenda's own rule?" Another nodded. I remember that meeting. The silence grew even louder. The band began unplugging speakers one cable at a time. Every metallic click echoed across the backyard that had been designed for celebration, but suddenly felt like a courtroom. Brenda's perfectly rehearsed smile cracked. "This policy wasn't meant for events like this," she protested. The code officer looked down at the printed documents. "It doesn't mention any exemptions." Of course it didn't. She wrote it herself. 6 weeks earlier, that same woman had stood in front of 30 homeowners inside the clubhouse insisting that even the smallest daytime music disturbed the community's peace. She smiled while finding neighbors for birthday songs, backyard radios, and fathers listening to country music while fixing fences. She called it protecting neighborhood harmony. I remembered the smell of fresh cedar that morning, the slow rhythm of an old Johnny Cash song drifting from my Bluetooth speaker, the sound of her high heels crunching across my gravel driveway before she handed me my very first violation notice. She thought silence belonged to her. She never imagined silence would become the one thing that destroyed the most important party she'd ever planned. My name is Ethan Walker, and 6 weeks before Brenda Holloway's birthday party collapsed into the quietest disaster our neighborhood had ever witnessed, all I wanted was a peaceful Saturday morning and an old Johnny Cash record playing through a weathered Bluetooth speaker. The smell of fresh cedar always reminded me of my dad. He spent 38 years building houses across central Ohio, and he used to say you could tell the quality of a carpenter by the way he respected the grain before making the first cut. I still heard those words every time my circular saw bit into a new board. The scent of raw wood mixed with black coffee had become my version of therapy after my divorce. I bought this little ranch house in Brookstone Meadows 9 months earlier. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a detached garage, a backyard just big enough for weekend projects. After 18 years of marriage ended with signatures on a courthouse table, I wasn't chasing luxury anymore. I wanted quiet mornings, honest work, and enough room to rebuild more than fences. Most weekdays I restored furniture for local clients. On weekends, I fixed whatever my own place needed. That Saturday, It happened to be the old cedar privacy fence separating my yard from the walking trail behind the subdivision. The July sun hadn't fully climbed over the maple trees yet. Morning dew still clung to the grass. A gentle breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut lawns from somewhere down the block, while Johnny Cash hummed softly about life, regret, and redemption. The music wasn't loud enough to reach the sidewalk. It blended into the steady rhythm of my drill, the occasional chirp of robins, and the satisfying crunch of gravel beneath my work boots. That's exactly how I liked it. Neighbors waved as they walked their dogs. Mr. Collins slowed his morning jog just long enough to raise his coffee cup toward me. "Fence is looking good, Ethan." "Getting there," I answered with a grin. Life finally felt normal again. Then the clicking sound of expensive high heels echoed across my driveway. I didn't even need to look up. Every homeowner in Brookstone Meadows recognized that sound. Brenda Holloway never simply walked through the neighborhood. She patrolled it. White designer sunglasses. Pressed pastel blazer despite the summer heat. Perfect blonde hair that somehow never moved in the wind. And, as always, a black leather clipboard tucked under one arm like it carried the Constitution itself. The faint scent of expensive perfume reached me before she did, trying, and failing, to overpower the smell of fresh lumber. She stopped beside my speaker without saying good morning. Her eyes dropped to the little Bluetooth radio sitting on my workbench. Then she glanced toward the fence, toward my saw, toward my permit folder lying neatly beside the toolbox. She inspected everything like a customs officer searching for contraband. Finally, she smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind that warned you paperwork was about to ruin your day. "Mr. Walker," she said sweetly enough to make sugar sound threatening. "Several residents have expressed concerns about unnecessary daytime noise." I looked around. The nearest house sat almost 80 feet away. Johnny Cash was barely louder than the birds. "I'm just replacing my fence," I replied. Her pen clicked. "So I see." The sound of that pen snapping open still echoes in my memory. Because I didn't realize it then. But that tiny click was the first domino in a chain that would eventually silence the loudest party Brenda Holloway had ever planned. Brenda didn't hand me the violation notice immediately. That wasn't her style. People like Brenda Holloway never rushed a performance. She believed authority worked best when it lingered in the air like expensive perfume, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. She scribbled a few notes onto her clipboard while I drove another screw through the cedar post. The steady whine of my impact driver echoed for a second before fading back into Johnny Cash's gravelly voice. Even then, my speaker wasn't loud enough to drown out the rustling leaves overhead. She waited until the song ended. Only then did she clear her throat. "I've been receiving complaints," she announced. Funny thing was, there wasn't another person within earshot. Mr. Collins had already disappeared around the corner. The couple walking their golden retriever were halfway down the trail. No one stood behind her. No witnesses. Just Brenda and her invisible chorus of anonymous complaints. "I wasn't aware music at conversation volume violated HOA rules," I said. She smiled. "Oh, it doesn't." There it was. The pause. The little dramatic silence before the knife. "But it will." The words landed harder than I expected. She slid a neatly folded paper onto my workbench beside the drill. The edge of the page fluttered in the breeze, carrying the scent of cedar dust across the yard. Emergency board meeting. Thursday evening. Mandatory attendance encouraged. Agenda item number 1. Community Quiet Hours Modernization Initiative. I actually laughed. You need an emergency meeting because somebody's listening to Johnny Cash while fixing a fence? Her smile never moved. "It isn't about you, Ethan." People who start a sentence that way almost always mean exactly the opposite. It's about preserving neighborhood standards. Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the concrete sidewalk with military precision. Click, click, click. By Thursday evening, the clubhouse parking lot looked fuller than I'd ever seen it. The air conditioning blasted against the humid July heat as homeowners filtered inside, carrying bottled water and tired expressions. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee, fresh printer ink, and polished wood furniture that nobody actually liked sitting on. Brenda stood behind the podium, wearing another perfectly pressed pastel jacket. Behind her hung a giant projector screen displaying 4 words. Community Peace Improvement Plan. You would have thought she was presenting a proposal to Congress. She clicked through slides filled with charts, stock photos of smiling families, and vague statistics about stress levels, property values, and neighborhood harmony. Then came the real target. Several residents, she announced, have expressed concern regarding unnecessary daytime recreational noise. She never looked directly at me. She didn't have to. Half the room already had. One slide showed lawn equipment. Another showed Bluetooth speakers. Another displayed children playing basketball beneath the words excessive outdoor activity. The room became noticeably quieter. Brenda knew exactly how to manufacture agreement. She didn't accuse people. She made them afraid of becoming the next example. An elderly woman slowly raised her hand. So, are we talking about construction work? Necessary maintenance remains permitted. A younger father frowned. What about kids playing music during birthday parties? Brenda tilted her head sympathetically. Responsible families understand moderation. Translation? She'd decide what moderation meant. Then she clicked to the final slide. Article 8, Section 3.2 No Amplified Outdoor. Music audible beyond the immediate property line between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. unless expressly authorized by the HOA board. Violations: $250. Each occurrence. No listed exemptions. No holidays. No birthdays. No private celebrations. Nothing. I remember staring at that last sentence. Most people in the room saw another HOA rule. I saw something different. Brenda had just built herself the nicest little cage I'd ever seen. She simply hadn't realized she'd locked the door from the inside. The new rule changed Brookstone Meadows faster than anyone expected. Not overnight. Silence doesn't arrive with a bang. It settles in one missing sound at a time. The following Saturday, I walked onto my back porch just after 8. The morning air carried the scent of wet grass from the automatic sprinklers, but something felt wrong before I could even explain it. No classic rock drifting from Mr. Collins' garage while he polished his old Mustang. No cheerful pop music from the Ramirez family as they decorated their patio for their daughter's birthday. No jazz floating from Mrs. Ellison's garden where she spent every weekend tending her roses. The neighborhood hadn't become peaceful. It had become cautious, as if everyone was waiting for someone to knock on the door. I understood why. 3 days after the meeting, the first violation letters began appearing in mailboxes. Then came the second wave. A teenager practicing guitar on his deck. A retired couple listening to Frank Sinatra while planting flowers. A family hosting a birthday barbecue with a portable speaker barely louder than conversation. $250. Every single time. The fines spread through the neighborhood faster than gossip. People stopped asking whether the rule made sense. They only wanted to know how to avoid becoming the next target. One afternoon, I watched 12-year-old Tyler Jenkins roll his basketball into the garage without taking a single shot. His mother quietly unplugged the little speaker they always kept on the driveway. "No music today," she whispered. Tyler didn't argue. He simply nodded. That bothered me more than the fines. Kids shouldn't have to. Measure joy against HOA regulations. Meanwhile, Brenda seemed happier than ever. Every evening around 6, she'd cruise slowly through the subdivision in her white Lexus SUV with the windows down, her black clipboard resting on the passenger seat like a trusted partner. She never drove fast. She wanted people to notice she was watching. Sometimes she'd stop beside a house for several minutes without getting out. That alone was enough. Curtains closed. Music disappeared. Garage doors slid shut. Fear did the work she no longer had to. One Friday afternoon, I ran into Mrs. Ellison at the community mailbox. She folded a violation notice into her purse before I could pretend not to notice it. "I forgot my radio was on while watering flowers," she said with an embarrassed smile. It was Glenn Miller. She looked down at the envelope. "I've lived here 26 years. Then she laughed softly. "I guess Glenn Miller is dangerous now." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was funny, because it wasn't. Over the next couple of weeks, I noticed something else. Brenda herself never seemed worried about the rules. She held board meetings with coffee and catered lunches. She hosted committee gatherings on her patio. Delivery trucks arrived almost every afternoon carrying folding tables, decorative lights, floral arrangements, and oversized catering boxes. At first, none of it seemed unusual. Then one Wednesday morning, while loading cedar boards into my truck, I saw 2 men unloading professional concert speakers from a rental van in front of Brenda's house. Not little Bluetooth speakers. Tower speakers. The kind used for weddings. Later that day, another truck delivered a temporary dance floor. The following morning came white event tents. By Friday afternoon, a local band was testing microphones in her backyard. Even from my driveway, I could hear the faint crackle of a sound check. 1, 2, testing, testing. I looked toward the brand new Article 8 folder sitting on my workbench, then back at the growing mountain of party equipment. For the first time since Brenda handed me that violation notice, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, because I had just realized something she hadn't. The loudest person in Brookstone Meadows had forgotten the quietest rule she ever wrote. People think revenge begins with anger. Mine began with reading. The afternoon after I watched those concert speakers disappear into Brenda Holloway's backyard, I carried a folding chair into my garage, turned off my own Bluetooth speaker, and spread every HOA document I owned across an old workbench stained with years of paint and sawdust. The smell of cedar had faded, replaced by paper, printer ink, and motor oil lingering from an engine I'd rebuilt the previous winter. Sunlight slipped through the open garage door in long golden stripes, illuminating stacks of bylaws most homeowners never bothered to read. I started with the original governing documents, then the amendments, then the meeting minutes. Finally, the packet Brenda had proudly distributed after the Community Peace Improvement Plan passed. Page after page, paragraph after paragraph. Legal language designed to make ordinary people give up halfway through. Brenda was counting on exactly that. She underestimated one thing. Carpenters measure twice because mistakes are expensive. I read the documents the same way I built furniture. Slowly, carefully. Every sentence had a purpose. Every comma mattered. Hours passed. Outside, sprinklers clicked on one zone at a time. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked before its owner hurried it inside. Even the neighborhood seemed afraid of making too much noise now. Then I found it. Not a loophole. Something even better. The rule itself. Article 8, Section 3.2 wasn't selective. It wasn't written to regulate certain homeowners. It applied equally to every property governed by the association. Board members, committee chairs, even the HOA president. There wasn't a single sentence creating an exception for private events, official gatherings, board celebrations, or community functions. Nothing. Brenda had written one of the rarest things imaginable. A rule she couldn't escape. I leaned back in my chair and read the paragraph again. Then a third time. Still the same. The corners of my mouth lifted into a smile I hadn't worn in weeks. Not because I was happy she'd made a mistake. Because I finally understood something. Justice wouldn't require creativity. Only patience. The next morning I drove to the hardware store for more fence stain. On my way home, I passed the entrance to Brookstone Meadows and noticed another delivery truck parked outside Brenda's house. This one unloaded folding banquet tables. The driver struggled to wheel them across her immaculate driveway while another worker carried boxes labeled event linens. Later that afternoon, a florist arrived. The day after that, a catering company dropped off commercial refrigerators. Neighbors noticed. Nobody said much. Fear has a strange way of turning conversations into whispers. At the mailbox, Mr. Collins leaned closer than usual. "You think she's having a wedding?" I shook my head. "Heard it's her 25th anniversary party," he said quietly. "Big one." I looked toward Brenda's house. Workers were hanging string lights between tall maple trees in the backyard. White tints stretched across nearly the entire lawn. Every new decoration made one thing clearer. This wasn't going to be a quiet family dinner. It was going to be the loudest event Brookstone Meadows had seen in years. That evening, while organizing receipts inside my garage, I heard another sound drifting through the neighborhood. A microphone. Check, check, 1, 2. The audio crackled for a moment before someone adjusted the volume. I walked to the end of my driveway. The music hadn't started yet. Only sound tests. Only preparation. Only evidence. For the first time since Brenda handed me that violation notice, I didn't feel frustrated. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel triumphant. I felt calm. Because I wasn't planning to interrupt her party. I wasn't going to argue with her. I wasn't going to raise my voice, file complaints out of spite, or give her the confrontation she always seemed to enjoy. I was simply going to let Brenda Holloway spend thousands of dollars celebrating beneath the very rule she believed everyone else was foolish enough to obey. Once I knew the rule had no exceptions, the hardest part wasn't building a case. It was pretending I didn't have one. The following week, I went back to living exactly as I always had. Every morning, I loaded lumber into my truck before sunrise. Every afternoon, I stained fence panels, repaired cabinets, and waved to neighbors who had slowly started speaking in quieter voices than they used to. If Brenda happened to drive past, I smiled politely and kept working. Nothing about my routine changed. That was important. People expect revenge to be noisy. Real patience is almost invisible. Meanwhile, Brenda's backyard transformed into something that looked more like a wedding venue than a suburban home. On Monday, electricians installed decorative lighting across the maple trees. On Tuesday, rental crews assembled a polished dance floor beneath a massive white tent. By Wednesday, refrigerated trucks arrived carrying trays of food. The smell drifting across the neighborhood changed every day. Fresh flowers, new lumber, freshly washed linens. Eventually smoked brisket from a catering company running test cooks in portable kitchens. Every delivery represented another check she had written, another commitment she couldn't easily cancel. I never stopped to stare. I simply noticed. On Thursday evening, I sat on my front porch with a glass of iced tea while pretending to read a woodworking magazine. Across the street, two young men wearing black polo shirts rolled towering speaker cabinets into Brenda's backyard. Professional equipment, far beyond anything you'd use for background music. One of them tapped a microphone. Testing 1, 2. The sound echoed through half the subdivision before someone lowered the volume. Nobody complained. Nobody walked over. Nobody wanted another fine. That silence told me more than words ever could. The neighborhood had become conditioned. People no longer challenged authority. They adjusted themselves instead. Friday morning, while organizing invoices inside my garage, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the HOA. Subject line: reminder, community standards apply to all residents. I almost laughed. The attached newsletter encouraged homeowners to respect the recently adopted daytime noise policy and warned that enforcement would continue without exception. Without exception. Those 3 words mattered. I saved the email. Then I printed it. Not because I planned to use it immediately. Because experience had taught me that digital files disappear far more easily than paper. By that afternoon, I had assembled a simple folder. Nothing dramatic. Just documents. The original bylaw. The amended rule. The board meeting minutes. Copies of violation notices issued to homeowners. The HOA newsletter. Every page arranged in chronological order. Facts don't need decoration. They only need organization. Saturday finally arrived. The air felt heavy before the sun had fully risen. Humidity settled over Brookstone Meadows like a blanket, carrying the scent of fresh mulch, blooming hydrangeas, and charcoal already heating inside enormous barbecue smokers behind Brenda's house. Luxury SUVs lined both sides of the street. Valet cones appeared near her driveway. Catering staff hurried between tents carrying silver trays covered with white cloth. By noon, guests began arriving in dresses, sport coats, and polished shoes. Laughter floated over backyard fences. Champagne corks popped. Someone tuned a guitar. Everything looked perfect. Exactly the kind of flawless celebration Brenda loved presenting to the world. I stayed home. I replaced 2 warped fence pickets. Around 1 o'clock, the first song drifted through the neighborhood. Not softly, not accidentally. The bass rolled through the ground beneath my boots. The lead singer welcomed everyone over the microphone. Applause erupted. Then another song began. I checked the clock. I didn't reach for my phone. Not yet. Justice works best when the facts are impossible to argue with. So I waited. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Long enough for every guest to settle into the celebration. Long enough for the music to become the unmistakable centerpiece of the afternoon. Only then did I close my toolbox, wipe the cedar dust from my hands, pick up the neatly organized folder from my workbench, and walk quietly back inside the house. For the first time in 6 weeks, I was finally ready to let Brenda's own rule introduce itself. The first phone call lasted less than 30 seconds. I never raised my voice. I never exaggerated. I simply introduced myself, gave my address, and asked one question. Does the county enforce neighborhood noise ordinances when the complaint involves HOA rules adopted by the community itself? The woman on the other end paused. Then she answered calmly. If documentation supports the complaint, we'll send an officer to verify. Thank you. That was it. No speeches. No anger. No revenge fantasy. Facts. After hanging up, I scanned every document into a single PDF. The amended bylaw. The meeting minutes. The HOA newsletter reminding residents that enforcement applied, without exception. Copies of the violation notices issued to homeowners over the previous month. Even the email Brenda herself had signed. Every page told the same story. Every signature belonged to her. I attached everything to an email address to the County Code Enforcement Office and copied the HOA's property management company. The subject line contained only 6 words. Article 8, Section 3.2 Enforcement Request. Then I hit send. The digital swoosh lasted less than a second. 6 weeks of patience disappeared with it. Outside, the party continued growing louder. I stepped onto my front porch carrying another cup of coffee. The July heat shimmered above the asphalt. Country music rolled across the subdivision through professionally amplified speakers powerful enough to vibrate the windows of my garage. The bass thumped steadily beneath my boots. Children laughed near an inflatable photo booth. Champagne glasses clinked beneath white tents decorated with gold ribbons. Someone cheered as the band introduced Brenda and her husband for their anniversary dance. Across the street, luxury SUVs continued arriving. Valet attendants jogged between vehicles. Photographers crouched near flower arrangements worth more than my monthly mortgage payment. Everything looked perfect. Exactly the kind of afternoon Brenda believed she controlled. Around 20 minutes later, my phone vibrated. Email notification. County Code Enforcement. Complaint received. 5 minutes after that came another. Officer dispatched. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. Then I picked up a paintbrush and continued staining the last section of my fence. Fresh cedar absorbed the dark stain slowly, releasing that familiar earthy scent that always reminded me why I loved building things instead of arguing with people. Behind me, the music became even louder. The master of ceremonies invited everyone toward the dance floor. Applause erupted. Then came another microphone announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, let's make some noise for Brenda and Michael. The crowd happily obeyed. The cheering echoed through Brookstone Meadows. I kept brushing stain onto the fence. One board, then another, then another. About 15 minutes later, I heard something different. Not sirens, just tires rolling slowly across pavement. 2 white county vehicles entered the subdivision without urgency. No flashing lights. No drama. They parked quietly beside the clubhouse before 2 officers stepped out carrying clipboards. Neither man hurried. Professionals rarely do. From where I stood, I watched them speak briefly with the valet attendant before walking toward Brenda's backyard entrance. The band continued playing. Guests kept dancing. Nobody noticed them yet. I set my paintbrush inside the tray and wiped my hands with an old shop towel. Across the street, one of the officers stopped beside the speaker tower and looked up toward the stage. The other unfolded a printed packet. Even from my driveway, I recognized the top page. Article 8, Section 3.2. The same words Brenda had proudly read aloud 6 weeks earlier. For just a moment, I closed my eyes and listened. Not to the music, to the tiny sounds hiding underneath it. The wind moving through the maple leaves. The distant chirping of sparrows. The soft creak of my unfinished fence. Because I knew those ordinary sounds were about to return. Not because I had defeated Brenda. Because she had finally been introduced to the one thing she never believed could apply to her. Her own rule. The music stopped in the middle of the chorus. Not at the end of the song. Not after one final dance. Right in the middle of it. The lead guitarist lowered his hands as confusion spread across the stage. The singer glanced toward the sound engineer, who instinctively reached for the mixing console before realizing the problem wasn't technical. 2 county officers were standing beside the speaker towers. One of them held up a hand. Everything fell silent. For a brief second, nobody understood what was happening. Then Brenda hurried across the dance floor, champagne glass still in her hand, the smile she had been wearing for photographs disappearing with every step. "There has to be some mistake," she said, forcing a laugh that fooled no one. "This is a private anniversary party." The older officer remained calm. "We're here regarding a documented complaint involving amplified outdoor sound." Brenda's eyebrows tightened. "My neighborhood doesn't have a city restriction." "No," he replied. "But your homeowners association does." The sentence landed like a hammer. Guests standing near the buffet slowly turned toward one another. Someone whispered, "What does he mean?" The younger officer opened the packet I had emailed earlier that afternoon. He didn't argue. He simply read, Article 8, Section 3.2. Outdoor amplified music audible beyond the immediate property line is prohibited between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. unless written authorization has been granted. He looked up. Can you provide written authorization? Brenda blinked. I'm the HOA president. I understand. Another pause. Do you have written authorization? She opened her mouth, closed it again. There wasn't any, because she had never written an exception. Around us, conversations began spreading through the crowd faster than the summer breeze. I remember that rule. Didn't she vote for it? My daughter got fined because of that. My parents paid $250. The whispers multiplied, each one louder than the music had ever been. Brenda turned towards several board members standing beneath the tent. Say something. None of them moved. Nobody wanted to argue with a document carrying Brenda's own signature. The band quietly unplugged their equipment. Heavy cables slid across the dance floor with dull scraping sounds. One speaker after another went dark. The sudden absence of music made every tiny noise stand out. Silverware clinking against dinner plates. Ice shifting inside melting drink glasses. A baby crying somewhere near the dessert table. Wind rustling through the decorative white fabric hanging from the tent poles. Silence had returned. The same silence Brenda had spent weeks forcing onto everyone else. Only this time, it belonged to her. The county officers completed their inspection without raising their voices. One issued a formal notice documenting the violation. Another handed Brenda a copy of the report. She accepted it with trembling fingers. Across the lawn, I remained beside my unfinished fence. I never crossed the street. I never celebrated. I simply watched. Because this moment had never been about humiliating her. It was about letting the rule she created perform exactly as she intended. Except now, she happened to be standing on the receiving end. One by one, guests began gathering purses, jackets, and unopened gift bags. Several quietly thanked the catering staff before leaving. The dance floor emptied first, then the buffet line, then the photo booth. Within 30 minutes, what had been the loudest celebration in Brookstone Meadows looked like an event ending hours before schedule. As the last members of the band loaded their instruments into a trailer, Brenda looked across the street and found me standing exactly where I had been all afternoon. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Between us stood an unfinished cedar fence, a quiet neighborhood, and one simple truth. Rules don't become unfair because they finally reach the person who wrote them. The following Monday, Brookstone Meadows sounded different. Not louder. Alive. I stepped onto my porch just after 7 with a mug of black coffee warming my hands. The air still carried the sweet scent of damp grass from the overnight sprinklers, and somewhere down the street a mockingbird was competing with an old wind chime for the title of loudest thing in the neighborhood. For the first time in weeks, nobody seemed afraid of making ordinary sounds. Mr. Collins rolled his garage door open and turned on his classic rock station while polishing the faded red Mustang he'd owned since high school. Across the street, the Ramirez family played upbeat Latin music while hanging laundry in the backyard. Even Mrs. Ellison was back among her roses, humming softly as Glenn Miller drifted from a tiny portable radio resting beside a watering can. Nobody was blasting music. Nobody was disturbing the peace. People were simply living again. Later that afternoon, an email from the HOA appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, "Special Board Announcement." I opened it while sitting at the same workbench where this whole story had quietly changed direction. Brenda Holloway had resigned as HOA president. The message called it a personal decision. I almost smiled. The truth rarely needs dramatic language. Word spread quickly that the property management company had launched a review of recent enforcement actions after receiving multiple homeowner complaints. Several fines were suspended pending evaluation. Others would be refunded entirely because they had been issued under inconsistent enforcement practices. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in weeks gathered near the community mailbox that evening. Not to gossip, to talk, to laugh, to ask how everyone's summer had been. Fear had stolen more than music from this neighborhood. It had stolen simple conversations. As the sun settled behind the maple trees, I carried the last cedar board into place and secured it with 2 stainless steel screws. The fence was finally finished. I brushed away a handful of sawdust and stepped back to admire the clean lines running across my backyard. The project had taken 6 weeks, longer than expected. Funny how the fence and the lesson had reached completion at exactly the same time. Before packing up my tools, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the same little Bluetooth speaker that had started everything. For a moment, I simply looked at it. Then I pressed play. Johnny Cash's familiar voice floated gently across the yard. Not loud, not hidden, just present. Nobody came walking across my driveway. No clipboard, no violation notice, no clicking high heels. Only music blending naturally with birdsong, children riding bicycles, lawn mowers in the distance, and neighbors living ordinary lives. I glanced across the street. The white tents were gone. The rental trucks had disappeared. Brenda's backyard looked strangely empty. A curtain shifted in one of her front windows before falling still again. That was the only sign anyone was home. I didn't wave. I didn't need closure from her. Because this story was never about defeating Brenda Holloway. It was about proving something much simpler. Power borrowed from rules disappears the moment those rules apply equally to everyone. Justice doesn't shout. It doesn't humiliate. It doesn't seek revenge for revenge's sake. It waits. It remembers. And when the moment finally arrives, it quietly asks only one question. If this rule was fair for everyone else, why shouldn't it be fair for you? Johnny Cash reached the final verse as the evening breeze carried the scent of fresh cedar through my backyard one last time. I smiled, picked up my coffee, and listened. Because the sweetest sound I heard that summer wasn't the music. It was a neighborhood that no longer had to whisper.